Rain pounds on the Navy training camp roof. Inside a dim locker room, laughter echoes. A group of male recruits mock the new arrival. A woman barely over 5 feet tall, carrying her duffel bag with quiet confidence. "Wrong locker room, sweetheart," one sneers. Another throws her towel aside, but she says nothing, simply places her uniform on the bench with military precision. When she takes off her jacket, scars from old combat wounds trace across her shoulder, silent proof of battles long fought. Moments later, the base door swings open. The commanding officer enters with a salute. "Listen up, soldiers. Meet your new team leader, Commander Alexandra Hart, one of the Navy's most decorated SEALs." The laughter dies instantly. The same men who mocked her now stand frozen, their smirks replaced by shame. They thought she didn't belong, but they were about to learn what true strength, discipline, and courage looked like. The wind howled across the open training field of Camp Spartan, a classified Navy training facility nestled deep within the cold cliffs of Virginia. Rain fell in relentless sheets, hammering the metal rooftops and soaking the parade grounds below. Recruits jogged through the storm, boots slapping mud, their voices rising in unison as they shouted cadence. The world here had no sympathy for weakness, only strength, discipline, and survival. Inside the main barracks, warmth was a distant luxury. The air reeked of sweat, metal, and disinfectant, the unmistakable scent of military life. A row of young male recruits sat laughing near their bunks, tossing jokes back and forth as thunder rumbled overhead. "New recruits arriving today," said Corporal Dan Rivers, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a permanent smirk. "Heard command is sending us a special transfer from overseas. Bet it's another wannabe who'll wash out in a week," the others chuckled. Private Mills, the youngest, grinned as he polished his boots. "Long as it's not another officer's kid trying to play soldier." The door creaked open and the laughter died. Replaced by a moment of confusion, a small figure stepped inside, water dripping from a dark hooded rain jacket. She carried a duffel bag slung across one shoulder, boots caked in mud, but her posture was straight, precise, every movement deliberate. As she pulled down her hood, the recruits froze. It was a woman. She had sharp eyes, calm and piercing, the kind that seemed to see through walls. Her jawline was firm, her face neither hardened nor soft, but balanced with a quiet intensity that made the air itself pause. She looked around the barracks once, taking in every detail, every recruit, every bunk, every careless laugh, still hanging in the air. Then she spoke. "Which one of you is in charge here?" The silence was thick. Rivers rose from his bunk, stepping forward with a grin that carried more arrogance than respect. "That'd be me, ma'am," he said, drawing out the word like a joke. "Didn't know they were letting civilians tour the base today?" The woman blinked once, unfazed. "Good," she said evenly. "Then you'll show me where to put my things," he frowned. "Excuse me?" She dropped her duffel bag onto the floor. The heavy thud made everyone flinch. "I said," she repeated, her tone firm yet calm, "show me where I'll be staying." Laughter erupted around the room. Mills nearly fell off his bunk. "You've got to be kidding me. They're putting a woman in this barracks?" Rivers leaned against a post, arms folded. "Sweetheart, this is a SEAL prep unit. You might want the nursing division down the road." The woman gave no reaction. She simply picked up her duffel again and walked past them toward the far locker room, boots echoing sharply on the tile. The recruits exchanged amused looks, their laughter following her through the doorway. Inside the locker room, steam hissed from the showers, the tiles slick with water. She set her things down and began removing her wet jacket, revealing the scars along her shoulder. Long, pale reminders of a violent past. The room went quiet for a moment as two recruits entered, still chuckling to themselves. "Hey, ma'am," one of them said mockingly. "You sure you're in the right place?" She looked up. "Positive. Because this is where real soldiers train," he continued. "Not the kind who—" Before he could finish, she straightened, fixing him with a gaze so sharp it cut his words mid-sentence. There was something in her eyes, not anger, not pride, but the still, cold authority of someone who had seen real war. The man stepped back instinctively, Uncertain why his stomach suddenly turned cold, she didn't say another word. She opened her locker, hung her uniform, and proceeded with silent precision. Every action, from folding her towel to tightening her bootlaces, was efficient, almost mechanical. The recruits whispered and snickered behind her, but she ignored them completely. Moments later, the barracks door slammed open again. Lieutenant Marshall, the base commanding officer, entered, his boots tracking rainwater across the floor. The room snapped to attention, almost. Rivers and the others scrambled to their feet, still half smiling. "At ease," Marshall said, his voice echoing. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on the woman by the lockers. Then his tone shifted. "Listen up, gentlemen. This base just got reassigned under new leadership. Effective immediately, you'll be reporting to your new unit commander, Commander Alexandra Hart." Every smirk vanished. The room fell into stunned silence. Marshall gestured toward her. Commander Hart served 12 years in naval special warfare, 6 overseas missions, 2 behind enemy lines, and 1 classified operation that earned her the Navy Cross. She's one of the most decorated SEALs in U.S. history. You will treat her with the respect her record demands. The recruit stood motionless. Rivers blinked, his earlier confidence draining from his face. "She's a SEAL commander," he muttered under his breath. Alexandra turned to face them fully for the first time. The air grew heavy, not from volume but presence. Her calm, unblinking gaze met each of theirs in turn. "I've read your files," she said quietly. "Some of you think you're tough. Some of you think you've seen hardship. But what I see are boys trying to play soldiers. No one dared breathe. You'll call me Commander Hart," she continued. "You will not underestimate me. You will not underestimate anyone in this unit, man or woman. From this moment on, we are a team, and in this team, arrogance is weakness." Her voice didn't rise once, yet the weight behind her words pressed down like a storm. Then she looked directly at Rivers. "Corporal Rivers, you'll report to my office in 10 minutes for your squad assignment. Bring your team. We start drills at 0500. No excuses." "Yes, Commander," Rivers stammered, his throat dry. As she passed by him on her way out, the room seemed to shrink. Her boots echoed again, steady and sure, until the door closed behind her. For several seconds, no one spoke. Finally, Mills exhaled, voice trembling with disbelief. "That woman's our commander?" Rivers sat down slowly on the bench, his earlier arrogance replaced with something else, confusion, maybe shame. "No way," he murmured. "She can't be." He stopped mid-sentence, remembering the scars on her shoulder, the calm fire in her eyes. Outside, the rain still fell, relentless and cold. Commander Alexandra Hart stood beneath the grey sky, looking out at the training field, where her new recruits would soon face their greatest tests. She wasn't here to prove herself, not to them, not to anyone. She was here to shape them, to burn away their pride until only discipline remained, because she knew something they didn't yet understand. In battle, respect isn't demanded, it's earned. The thunder rolled across the base, echoing like a drumbeat of destiny. And inside the barracks, for the first time that day, not a single recruit dared to laugh. The sun had barely begun to rise the next morning when the piercing sound of a whistle shattered the stillness. "Up, up, move it, recruits!" The barracks erupted in chaos, men scrambling out of bunks, pulling on boots, shouting half-awake responses. But before anyone could gather themselves, the door swung open with a hard metallic creak. Commander Alexandra Hart stood in the doorway, uniform crisp, posture flawless, eyes as sharp as a drawn blade. No one had expected her to be there that early, certainly not the recruits who were still half-dressed. Her voice carried like thunder. "Good morning, gentlemen. I see the concept of discipline hasn't reached this room yet." Rivers, who had barely managed to lace one boot, straightened awkwardly. "Commander, we weren't informed." She cut him off coldly. "You were informed last night." "Who 500? I don't repeat myself." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, with a quiet calmness that felt even more intimidating, she added, "You have 5 minutes to be outside. Full gear, no exceptions." She turned and left without another word. As the door shut behind her, the room erupted into whispered panic. 5 minutes. Mills hissed. "We're dead." Rivers groaned. "I swear she's testing us." But deep down, he knew this was more than a test. It was a message. Outside, the rain had stopped, replaced by a damp chill that clung to their skin. The training field stretched wide and unforgiving, littered with obstacle rigs, climbing walls, and mud trenches that glistened under the pale dawn. Commander Hart stood before them, hands behind her back, eyes scanning the line of recruits like a hawk assessing prey. "You think this is hard?" she said evenly. "You think 0500 is early? You haven't even begun to understand what hard is." She stepped closer, boots crunching the gravel. "You are not here to prove that you're strong. You are here to learn that strength without control is useless." Her gaze lingered on Rivers, long enough for the others to notice. "Let's see if you can back up all that confidence." "Corporal." The drills began, and by the first hour, it was clear this wouldn't be a normal day. Burpees, sprints, push-ups, non-stop for 45 minutes. No breaks, no leniency. Hart led every exercise herself, matching, no outpacing, every man on the field. When she ran, she didn't just move fast. She moved with precision, like each step had purpose. Her breathing never wavered, her focus never faltered. The recruits, on the other hand, were falling apart. Mills collapsed face first in the mud, gasping. "This is insane." "Get up!" Hart barked. "Pain is weakness leaving the body." By the second hour, Rivers' pride began to crumble. His muscles ached, his lungs burned, but he refused to fall behind, not in front of her. He pushed harder, only to see Hart sprint past him with effortless control. When the whistle finally blew, they collapsed into the dirt, drenched in sweat and disbelief. Hart didn't look tired. She simply said, "Lesson 1, strength means nothing without endurance." Then she turned to Rivers. "Lesson 2, the loudest voices are often the weakest." Rivers clenched his jaw but said nothing. For the first time, he wasn't sure if he was angry or ashamed. Later that afternoon, after hours of weapon drills and tactical formation training, the recruits found themselves back in the locker room. The mood had shifted since the day before. The laughter was quieter now, tinged with uncertainty. Yet some pride still lingered. "All right," Mills said, rubbing his shoulder. "She's tough. I'll give her that. But come on, how hard can she really be? She's what, 5'3"? "Don't underestimate her," muttered Rivers, though even he sounded unsure. "Still, there's something off. Commanders don't just show up like that. There's more to her." Private Tanner, sitting on the bench, scoffed. "Yeah, maybe she just got lucky." "I bet she hasn't even seen real combat." The locker room door creaked open again, and just like before, silence fell. Hart walked in, holding a clipboard, her uniform sleeves rolled up to the elbows. She didn't glance at anyone, moving straight to her locker. The men exchanged looks. Mills whispered, "Think she heard us?" Hart set the clipboard down and turned. Her voice was calm. "If you have something to say it to my face." No one spoke. She took a step forward. "You think I haven't seen combat?" Another step. "You think I don't belong here?" Still silence. Then she reached into her locker and pulled out a small black case. When she opened it, a dozen medals gleamed inside. Rows of honor, bravery, and distinction. She set it on the bench in front of them. "Each of these was earned in places you wouldn't survive a single day," she said softly. "Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen. I've watched soldiers fall while carrying half the weight I've carried." Her tone never rose, yet every word landed with the weight of truth. "I don't need your respect," she continued. "I've earned that long before I met any of you. What you need is discipline, because arrogance gets people killed." She closed the case and picked up her clipboard. "Now suit up. Training resumes in 10 minutes. She left the room. The silence she left behind wasn't just quiet. It was heavy with realization. Rivers stared at the door long after she was gone. "She's the real deal," he muttered. Mills swallowed hard. "What did we just do yesterday?" No one answered. The truth was obvious. They had mocked a warrior who had already proven herself on the front lines. That evening, when the recruits gathered in the mess hall, the whispers about Commander Hart filled the air. Rumors spread, fragments of her classified missions, stories of bravery that seemed almost impossible. Someone said she led an extraction in Yemen. Alone, one recruit whispered. Another added, heard she carried 2 wounded men out of enemy territory by herself. Rivers listened quietly, pushing food around his tray. Each new detail carved deeper into his conscience. He had laughed at her, mocked her, treated her like she didn't belong. Now the shame burned hotter than any drill. As night fell, the recruits gathered once more in the training yard, summoned for a final briefing before dawn drills. Commander Hart stood before them again, her expression unreadable. "I know what some of you are thinking," she said. "You think this is punishment. It's not. It's preparation. Every soldier under my command learns the same truth. Respect is not demanded by rank. It's earned by action." She looked at them one by one. "You don't need to like me, but you will follow my orders. And by the time we're through, you'll understand why." She paused, letting the silence hang before her final words cut through the night like steel. "This isn't about proving that a woman can lead men. This is about proving that a leader, any leader, earns loyalty through courage, not words." With that, she dismissed them. The recruits stood frozen, her voice echoing in their minds long after she walked away. For the first time since her arrival, not one of them laughed. Not one of them doubted her. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of pride and ego, a spark of respect began to grow. Quiet, but real. The following days at Camp Spartan felt like an unending blur of mud, sweat, and exhaustion. The recruits had thought they understood intense training. They had been wrong. Commander Alexandra Hart ran the camp with the precision of a metronome and the patience of a storm. There was no room for sloppiness, no mercy for excuses. The day began before dawn, when the sky was still black and the cold air bit through their uniforms. The first whistle at 4:30 hours meant one thing: move or regret it. "Up, men!" Rivers shouted, though his voice carried none of his old arrogance. "Let's not make her wait again." By the time they stumbled onto the field, Hart was already there, standing under the floodlights, motionless except for the rise and fall of her steady breathing. She looked as if she hadn't slept, and yet not a single hair was out of place. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said calmly. "You'll begin with a 5-mile endurance run. Full gear, no pacing, no complaints. The only way you'll stop is if you pass out, and if you do, I'll personally make sure you get up again." No one laughed anymore. They ran, the weight of their gear cut into their shoulders. Mud clung to their boots like lead. Within minutes, sweat mixed with rain as the sky began to lighten. But Hart stayed ahead of them the entire time, never slowing, never faltering. Mills, struggling at the back, gasped, How is she not tired?" Rivers, panting beside him, glanced at Hart's unwavering stride. "Because she's built different," he said, almost with admiration. By the time they finished, most of the recruits collapsed into the dirt. Hart stood tall, watching them quietly, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke, voice calm but cutting through the morning air. "You think exhaustion is your enemy," she said. "It's not. It's your teacher. It shows you where your limits are. And if you can face it without fear, it will teach you to go beyond them." The men stared at her, too tired to respond, but too captivated to look away. The next phase of training began, underwater endurance. The recruits stood shivering by the pool, cold wind slicing through their wet uniforms. Hart paced in front of them. "Underwater holds," she said. "You'll stay submerged as long as you can. Panic will come, it always does. But you'll ignore it. You'll remember that fear is just a signal, not a sentence." She dove in first, her body cutting through the water with flawless form. The stopwatch ticked. 20 seconds, 30, 45. At 1 minute, a few recruits surfaced, gasping for air. At 1 minute 30, only a handful remained below. And still, she stayed under. When she finally surfaced at nearly 2 minutes, she didn't gasp or shake her head. She simply said, "Again." Rivers stared at her, chest heaving. "She's not human," he muttered. Mills replied between breaths. "She's a SEAL. That's the point. By the fifth round, their lungs burned, their arms trembled. But something had shifted. Their frustration was slowly turning into determination. That afternoon, during tactical drills, Hart observed them as they practiced room entry formations. The recruits stumbled, bumping into each other, shouting commands at the wrong times. "Stop!" she snapped. "You're thinking like individuals, not a unit." She walked over to the diagram on the ground, marked in chalk. "When you enter a room, your heartbeat must align with your team's. One rhythm, one motion, no ego. Ego gets your team killed." Her tone softened slightly as she added, "Discipline isn't just obedience, it's trust. When you trust each other, you stop hesitating. And hesitation is the difference between living and dying." Her words lingered long after the exercise ended. That evening, as the recruits ate silently in the mess hall, Rivers looked around at his team. No one dared complain anymore. Every man sat straight, uniforms clean, eyes focused. Even Mills, once the loudest joker, now double-checked his posture before sitting. "Guess she got through to us," Rivers muttered under his breath. "About time," Tanner said. "She's something else." Rivers nodded slowly. "Yeah, she is." The following week brought a new level of challenge: night operations. The recruits were dropped off deep in the nearby forest just past midnight, armed only with flashlights, compasses, and their wits. The objective: navigate 5 miles through the terrain and reach the extraction point before sunrise. Unknown to them, Hart shadowed the mission, watching from the darkness, testing not their strength but their coordination. Rain began to fall again, the forest floor turning slick. Mills tripped, Tanner lost his compass, and tension flared. "This is hopeless," Mills hissed. "We'll never make it." Rivers grabbed him by the collar. "Pull yourself together. We've got this." Then from the darkness, Hart's voice cut through the storm, calm but close. "What's the first rule of survival?" They froze. "Adapt," she said, stepping out of the shadows, soaked but unshaken. "The terrain doesn't care about your frustration. Neither does the mission. If you panic, you lose. If you blame, you fail. But if you adapt, you win." Her eyes met Rivers. "You're the senior here, Corporal. Lead them." For the first time, he didn't hesitate. "Yes, Commander." He reorganized the formation, took point, and led them through the forest with renewed purpose. Every stumble, every shout, every decision, she watched, silent but approving. When they finally reached the extraction zone at dawn, soaked, muddy, but intact, Hart nodded once. "Good. That's how soldiers are made, not by strength, but by unity." For the first time since her arrival, a faint smile touched her lips. Back at camp, as the recruits cleaned their weapons after the mission, Rivers approached her quietly. "Commander," he said, "permission to speak freely?" "Granted," he hesitated. "When you first arrived, I didn't respect you. None of us did. But you've earned more than that. You've earned loyalty. And He stopped, unsure how to continue. Hart regarded him calmly. "Corporal, respect doesn't need apologies. It needs growth. You're learning." "That's enough," he nodded, humbled. "Yes, ma'am." As he turned to leave, she added, "Rivers, leadership isn't about being followed. It's about being trusted. Remember that." Over the next few days, the camp transformed. The laughter that once filled the barracks was replaced by focus, discipline, and quiet camaraderie. Recruits helped each other tighten straps, adjust rifles, and correct stances. They moved in synchronization, no longer as individuals, but as a unit. And everywhere they went, Commander Hart's presence loomed, not through intimidation, but through respect. Even Mills, who had once mocked her, was overheard saying, "If she told me to run through a wall, I'd ask how fast." By the end of the 3rd week, something remarkable had happened. They no longer saw her as the woman commander. They saw her as their commander, and that was exactly what Alexandra Hart had been fighting for from the start. Thunder rolled across the cliffs like cannon fire, and sheets of rain hammered the training grounds. It was supposed to be a routine drill, a live simulation exercise to test how well the recruits could handle chaos. But Camp Spartan had a way of turning routine into something far more revealing. Commander Alexandra Hart stood under the floodlights, clipboard in hand, rain dripping from the brim of her cap. Her voice, calm yet commanding, cut through the storm. Listen up, team. Today's operation simulates a field extraction under enemy fire. You'll move through the obstacle course, secure the wounded soldier, and bring him safely to the extraction point. Communication and coordination are everything. She turned to Rivers. You'll lead your squad. Show me what you've learned. Rivers nodded sharply. Yes, Commander. He and his men strapped on their gear, adrenaline buzzing through their veins. Mills, Tanner, and the others checked their weapons and equipment, rain pelting their faces as the wind howled around them. Ready? Rivers called out. Ready! They shouted back. Hart blew her whistle. Go! The recruits charged into the storm, water splashing around their boots. The course was a maze of trenches, barbed wire, and towering barriers. Visibility was low. Flashes of lightning illuminated the field in chaotic bursts. Left flank, Rivers yelled over the wind. Cover position 3! The team moved with surprising coordination. Despite the storm, their training showed. Movements synchronized, communication crisp. Hart watched from the observation post, her expression unreadable, but her eyes sharp with focus. Halfway through the course, Tanner, who carried the dummy representing the wounded soldier, slipped on the muddy slope of a trench. He tumbled down hard, the heavy mannequin pinning him beneath its weight. Man down! Rivers shouted. Tanner's hit! The rest of the squad hesitated, the rain blurring their vision. Get him up! Mills yelled, sliding into the trench. He grabbed Tanner's arm, but couldn't lift the combined weight of his comrade and the soaked dummy. Tanner, you good? Rivers called. Tanner groaned in pain. My leg twisted it. Rivers cursed under his breath. This was no longer just a simulation. Corporal! Hart's voice crackled over the comm. Report status. Recruit down, Commander. Possible injury. Do not leave him, she ordered firmly. You know the rule. We don't abandon our own. Rivers nodded, determination hardening his expression. Copy that. The squad gathered around, trying to lift Tanner while balancing their gear. But the trench had filled halfway with rainwater, the mud sucking at their boots like quicksand. Every second dragged like an hour. Then, without warning, a loud crack split the air. One of the overhead training scaffolds, loosened by the storm, began to tilt. The metal frame groaned, teetering dangerously over the trench where Tanner lay trapped. Move! Everyone move! Rivers shouted, panic slicing through his command tone. The recruits scrambled up the slope, slipping and sliding. But Tanner couldn't move. His leg was pinned under the dummy, and the structure was seconds away from collapsing. Rivers turned back. I'm not leaving him. He sprinted back toward the trench, rain blinding him. Mills reached out. Rivers, don't! But before he could reach Tanner, a dark blur cut across the chaos. Commander Hart. She appeared out of nowhere, sprinting through the storm like a force of nature. Her boots splashed through the mud, her body low and controlled, every motion purposeful. Without hesitation, she dove into the trench beside Tanner. Can you move? No, ma'am, it's stuck. Tanner gasped. Hart planted one foot against the trench wall, gripped the dummy's straps, and heaved with every ounce of her strength. Mud clung to her uniform, rain blinded her, but she didn't stop. Come on, move. The metal structure above them groaned louder, bending under the wind. Rivers slid down to help, grabbing Tanner's arm. On 3, Hart shouted. 1, 2, 3. Together they pulled, and Tanner's leg came free just as the scaffolding gave way. The 3 of them tumbled backward, rolling through the mud as the structure crashed down where they had just been. The impact sent a shower of dirt and sparks into the air. For a few seconds, there was only the sound of rain and ragged breathing. Then Rivers looked at her, chest heaving. Commander, you could have been crushed. Hart shook her head, wiping mud from her face. And I wasn't. Get him up. Mission's not over. Despite the chaos, her calm authority never faltered. She radioed to base, voice steady. Recruit Tanner injured. Squad continuing extraction. Prepare med-evac. They carried Tanner through the rest of the course, every man silent but fiercely determined. When they finally reached the extraction point, drenched and exhausted, Hart gave a single nod of approval. Mission complete, she said quietly. Hours later, after Tanner was treated and cleared with only a mild sprain, the recruits gathered in the mess hall. The storm had passed, leaving a heavy stillness in its wake. No one touched their food. They just sat there, silent, thoughtful, humbled. Finally, Rivers spoke. She saved him. Didn't even think twice. Mills nodded slowly. You saw how she moved? Like it wasn't even a question. Just pure instinct. Rivers looked down at his hands. When she said, "We don't abandon our own," I thought it was just words. But she meant it. Tanner, sitting at the far end of the table with his bandaged leg, added softly, "She didn't even flinch. She could have been killed." And for me, the words hung heavy in the air. Later that night, Rivers stood outside the barracks, the cool breeze brushing against his face. The storm clouds had cleared, revealing a sky scattered with stars. He found Commander Hart standing by the flagpole, hands clasped behind her back, looking out toward the ocean beyond the cliffs. "Commander," he said quietly. She turned slightly, acknowledging him. "Corporal, I wanted to thank you," he began, "for what you did back there. You didn't have to—" "Yes, I did," she interrupted softly. "That's what leadership is, Rivers. You don't weigh the cost when your people are in danger. You act," he hesitated. "You've done this before, haven't you?" In the field, her gaze drifted to the horizon. "More times than I care to remember." There was a pause, the kind that carries more meaning than words. Then she said quietly, "Do you know why I became a SEAL?" Rivers shook his head. "My brother was one," she said. "He died during a rescue op, went back for a wounded comrade when everyone else thought it was too late. People called it reckless. I call it courage." Her voice softened. "I joined because I wanted to live by that same code. Because if someone falls under my command, I will always go back for them. Always." Rivers swallowed hard, the lump in his throat tightening. "He'd be proud of you, Commander." She looked at him, and for the first time since she arrived at Camp Spartan, her expression broke, not into a smile, but something deeper. A quiet, human warmth. "Maybe," she said softly. "But what matters is that you learn to carry that same code." He nodded firmly. "I will." As she turned to leave, she stopped and said one last thing, words that would stay with him long after the training ended. "Strength isn't proven by how much you can lift, Rivers. It's proven by how far you're willing to go for someone else." That night, for the first time since her arrival, the recruits didn't see Commander Hart as the woman they had mocked. They saw her as something far greater, a leader who led from the front, who risked everything without hesitation, and who had taught them what it truly meant to wear the uniform. And in that moment, as the camp lights flickered against the wet earth, even the toughest men at Camp Spartan knew their commander wasn't just elite, she was extraordinary. The following week at Camp Spartan felt different. The storm had passed, but something far more powerful had settled in its wake. Respect. For the first time since Commander Hart had stepped foot into the camp, the recruits looked at her not with skepticism or pride, but with the quiet acknowledgement that she had earned every ounce of authority she carried. The jokes stopped, the laughter ceased. Even the swagger in their walk softened into focus. Hart noticed the change, but said nothing. She didn't need to. Discipline, she knew, was not built through orders. It was born through moments that tested the soul. Each morning began before dawn. The sound of the bugle echoed through the base, followed by her steady voice cutting across the frosty air. "Up! Gear on! You have 2 minutes!" Where once there had been groans and sluggish movement, now there was precision. Boots hit the floor, uniforms were buttoned, and recruits lined up under the flag as the sun broke over the horizon. Hart paced before them, her posture straight, her eyes as sharp as ever. "You are not the same men who stood here 2 weeks ago," she said one morning. "But do not mistake progress for perfection. You've earned my notice, not yet my trust." She stopped before Rivers, who stood at attention, face streaked with sweat from the early drills. "Corporal Rivers," she said, "you led your team under pressure. You showed courage, but courage without control is chaos. Learn the difference. Yes, Commander, he replied crisply. Then she turned to Mills. You have strength, but strength alone cannot save a man in the field. Strategy will. Finally, she looked to Tanner, his leg now bandaged but healing fast. And you, Recruit Tanner. You learned the hardest lesson, that leadership is not about being first, but about making sure no one is left behind. Her words hung in the air like scripture. None of them dared look away. Dismissed, she said. Breakfast in 10. As they dispersed, Rivers glanced at Mills. She's right. I thought this was all about muscle and shouting. Turns out it's about something else entirely. Mills nodded. Yeah, it's about becoming the kind of man she already is. 2 days later, Hart introduced what she called the fire drill, a grueling 48-hour endurance test that simulated combat exhaustion, hunger, and teamwork under duress. The recruits were divided into squads, each given limited supplies and a single objective: navigate 10 miles of rocky terrain, locate a beacon in the wilderness, and return before the 48-hour deadline. No GPS, no shortcuts, only skill and instinct. Out there, she said before they left, you'll face 2 enemies, fatigue and doubt. Beat them, and you'll discover what you're made of. By the first night, exhaustion gnawed at them like wolves. Their clothes were soaked with sweat, their boots blistered. The forest around Camp Spartan was dense, the air thick with mist and the hum of crickets. Compass says north, Rivers muttered, squinting at the dim needle under his flashlight. But the ridge looks off, Mills groaned. We're lost again, aren't we? Tanner sighed. Don't start. Then from the shadows came a quiet voice. You're reading it wrong. They turned, and there she was, Commander Hart, standing beneath a cluster of pine trees, arms folded, her face half hidden in shadow. Commander? Rivers said, startled. What are you doing out here? Observing, she replied coolly, and apparently waiting for you to realize you've been walking south for the past hour. The men exchanged embarrassed looks. Lesson number 1, she said, stepping closer, trust your compass, not your ego. She knelt, tracing the dirt with her finger, drawing a simple map. Here's your position. Adjust your heading. Follow the stream east for half a mile. You'll find the beacon near the ridge. Then she straightened and looked at them, her tone softening slightly. Don't waste your energy arguing about who's right. Use it to get where you need to go. With that, she disappeared into the forest mist. The men stood there for a moment, stunned. Then Rivers whispered, does she ever sleep? Tanner chuckled. Not when we're screwing up, apparently. They laughed. A quiet, genuine sound. Not the mockery of before, but the shared laughter of soldiers who finally understood their commander. When the squads returned, mud-streaked and bone-tired but triumphant, Hart assembled them once again in the mess hall. They expected another lecture, but instead, she surprised them. Sit, she said simply. They obeyed. She set her cap on the table and looked around at the faces that had once doubted her. You've earned something I rarely give, a story. The recruits exchanged glances. My name is Commander Alexandra Hart, she began quietly. But before that, I was Lieutenant Hart, the only woman in my SEAL qualification class. 36 men started that course. Only 6 of us finished. And I was one of them. Her voice didn't waver, but her eyes drifted toward the window, as if she could still see those early days in her mind. I was mocked, ignored, and pushed harder than anyone else. They wanted me to quit, to prove that women didn't belong there. But I stayed, because quitting wasn't an option. Not when my brother's dog tags hung around my neck. The room went still. He was killed in action during a rescue mission. His last message said, don't ever stop fighting for what's right, no matter how loud the noise gets. She paused, the silence thick. So I didn't stop. Not when they laughed, not when they doubted, and not when I nearly drowned during our final dive test. I passed that test not because I was stronger than them, but because I refused to believe their limits applied to me. The recruits listened, transfixed. When I earned my trident, the same men who once mocked me stood at attention and saluted. Not because I demanded respect, but because I earned it. She looked around the room. her gaze fierce yet kind. That's why I'm here, to make sure you understand that the world doesn't care where you came from, what you look like, or what people say you can't do. It only cares about what you prove under pressure. Her words struck like lightning. River's throat tightened. Tanner's hands clenched around his cup. Even Mills, who once mocked her the loudest, found himself swallowing the lump rising in his chest. Hart straightened, her tone soft but resolute. You came here as individuals. You'll leave as brothers. And you'll remember this. Leadership isn't given by rank. It's forged by action. She grabbed her cap, placed it under her arm, and nodded once. Dismissed. The recruit stood in silence as she left the room. No applause, no chatter. Just the sound of hearts beating in collective understanding. That night, Rivers sat by his bunk, staring at his boots. The same boots that had once trudged through mud and arrogance. Tanner approached quietly. You all right, man? Rivers nodded slowly. Yeah, just thinking. I joined the SEALs to prove I was tough, but she's tougher than any of us, and she doesn't brag about it. She just is, Mills chuckled softly. Guess we needed to be broken down before we could understand what strength really means. Rivers looked toward the commander's quarters, where the light still glowed under her door. She changed us, he said simply, and as the lights dimmed across Camp Spartan, there was a new kind of silence. The calm that comes after growth, after realization, after transformation, the kind that marks the birth of soldiers who had finally learned what it meant to serve, not themselves, but something greater. The air at Camp Spartan carried a sharp chill the next morning. The dawn light glimmered faintly across the training grounds, glistening on the wet sand and the cold steel of the obstacle course. A low fog rolled in from the sea, thick and ghostly, muffling every sound except the distant cry of gulls. When the recruits assembled, they immediately sensed that something was different. There was no drill posted on the whiteboard. No list of assignments, just Commander Alexandra Hart standing before them. Her face unreadable, her uniform was immaculate, her eyes steady, but behind that composed exterior, there was an unmistakable gravity. Listen up, she began. Today is your final test, the culmination of everything you've learned. Endurance, teamwork, discipline, and heart. Her voice carried across the silent field. You will execute a full-scale simulated rescue operation under combat conditions. It will last 12 hours. You'll face live-fire blanks, disorientation, and tactical pressure. But this is not just about strength. It's about judgment, about who you've become. She stepped closer, scanning each face. Rivers, Mills, Tanner, and the rest of her recruits. This is not a drill. You fail this test. You fail my command. The words hit like cold iron. Then she added more quietly, you pass this, and you'll be ready to wear the uniform for real. By 0600 hours, the team was suited up and ready. The helicopter blades sliced through the fog as they boarded, the roar vibrating in their chests. Operation Falcon's Reach, Rivers read from the briefing folder. Objective, extract a captured operative from hostile territory, located 5 miles inside enemy lines. Hart stood near the cockpit, arms crossed, her tone clipped. You'll be dropped at LZ Bravo. Terrain is rough. Communication will be patchy. Command will monitor, but the mission's yours to run. Rivers nodded. Understood. She looked at him, not as a superior, but as a mentor ready to let go. You're leading this one, Corporal. Don't let me down. Rivers's jaw tightened. I won't, Commander. As the chopper took off, wind howled through the cabin. Tanner checked his rifle. Mills adjusted his earpiece. Every man's heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of the blades. Fast, focused, alive. Hart watched them go, her hand resting on the side of the aircraft. When the helicopter disappeared into the fog, she whispered under her breath, time to see if they've truly learned. The helicopter touched down hard. The team spilled out, boots sinking into wet soil. The air smelled of pine and smoke. Formation, Charlie, Rivers commanded. Mills, take point. Tanner, watch our flank. They moved through the forest in perfect sync, low, silent, alert. The drills, the lessons, the discipline, it all came together here. After an hour of movement, they reached the extraction zone, an abandoned mill by the river. Smoke grenades and simulated gunfire echoed from hidden speakers, creating a lifelike chaos. Contact left. Mills yelled, "Cover fire!" Rivers shouted back. They ducked behind logs and sandbags, firing blanks at distant silhouettes. The adrenaline surged, but this time no one panicked. Commands were sharp, movements efficient. Rivers' voice was steady. "Mills, suppress. Tanner, get to that ridge, now!" "Yes, sir." Within minutes, they breached the structure and found the operative, a dummy representing the captured soldier. They secured it with precision, following every procedure Hart had drilled into them. "Extraction point 1 mile east," Rivers said into his comm. Moving out, the team began their retreat through the forest. But just as they cleared the tree line, a deep rumble shook the ground. A planned explosive, part of the simulation, had detonated near the trail ahead. The blast sent shockwaves through the trees. The recruits dove for cover, ears ringing, then silence. Everyone sound off. Rivers barked, "Mills here!" Tanner, good. "Sanders clear!" Then a voice they didn't expect. Commander Hart to all units. Incoming storm front detected. Wind speeds increasing. Evacuation window closing in 30 minutes. Rivers frowned. "Commander? I thought you were monitoring from base." Her voice came through the static. "Was. But when I saw the front moving in, I decided to meet you halfway. Don't worry, I'm nearby." "Copy that," Rivers said. The worry crept into his tone. The rain came fast, turning the trail into a river of mud as they moved. Lightning split the sky, and suddenly a massive tree cracked under the wind, collapsing right between them and the extraction point. "Commander Hart," Rivers yelled into the radio. "The path's blocked." No response. Only static. "Commander, do you copy?" Still nothing, then faintly, pinned. "Southeast ridge." "Need the transmission cut off." Rivers' stomach dropped. "She's out there," Mills hesitated. "What do we do, Corporal?" "The extraction point's the other way." Rivers looked at his team. "We go after her." You heard her code. "We don't leave anyone behind." Tanner nodded instantly. "Let's move." They pushed through the rain, visibility near zero. The forest roared with wind and thunder. Finally they found her, trapped beneath a fallen log, leg pinned, radio cracked. "Commander!" Rivers shouted, rushing to her side. Hart looked up, mud streaking her face, but her expression was calm. "You weren't supposed to come back." Rivers knelt beside her. "And leave you here?" "Not a chance." Tanner and Mills worked together, straining to lift the log. It wouldn't budge. "On 3, Rivers yelled. 1, 2, 3, they heaved, muscles trembling until the log finally rolled aside. Hart winced as they pulled her free. Her right leg was bleeding, a deep gash. "You're hurt," Rivers said. "I've been worse," she replied, forcing a smile. "Move. The evac's waiting." They half-carried her through the forest, mud splattering their faces, rain soaking their uniforms. When they reached the extraction point, the helicopter hovered overhead, lights slicing through the storm. The pilot waved frantically. "We've got seconds." Rivers hoisted Hart up and helped her aboard. Tanner and Mills climbed in behind. The door slammed shut, and the chopper lifted, just as another gust of wind tore through the clearing. Inside, the team sat breathless, soaked, trembling, and utterly silent. Then slowly, Hart looked at them and smiled faintly. "You did it," she said. "You remembered the code." Rivers grinned back. "You taught us well, Commander." Hours later, back at Camp Spartan, the recruits stood once more under the flag. The rain had stopped, the sky washed clean by the storm. Hart stepped forward, her leg bandaged, but her posture straight as ever. "You all passed," she said. "Not because you completed the mission, but because you chose the harder path." She paused, eyes glimmering. "In the real world, orders matter, but so does instinct. You followed both. You proved not just your skill, but your heart." Then she turned to Rivers. "Corporal, you led with courage and compassion. That's what makes a true soldier." Rivers saluted sharply. "Thank you, Commander." Hart looked at them all, her voice softer now. When you first arrived, I saw arrogance, fear, and ignorance. Today, I see warriors. I see men I would trust with my life." The recruits stood taller. Not one of them looked away. She gave a final nod. Class dismissed. As they saluted and dispersed, Rivers lingered behind. "Commander," he said quietly. "Yes, Corporal? You said once that strength isn't proven by how much you can lift, but by how far you're willing to go for someone else." He smiled faintly. "I finally understand that now." Hart's expression softened, pride flickering in her eyes. "Good. Then my job here is done." As the sun set over Camp Spartan, the sound of the waves below the cliffs carried through the wind. The recruits had come as boys. They would leave as soldiers, and Commander Alexandra Hart, the woman they once mocked in the showers, had become more than just their leader. She was their legend. 6 months had passed, and since that stormy night, Camp Spartan stood bathed in the gold of a late summer morning. The waves below the cliffs calmer than they had ever been. The scars of training, both physical and emotional, had long healed. But the lessons lingered. In the courtyard, rows of recruits stood in full dress uniform. The once awkward, defiant young men now stood tall, polished, and proud, their faces harder, wiser, changed. A banner fluttered above the parade ground. Graduation ceremony, Class 392. Among them stood Rivers, Mills, Tanner, and the rest of the squad that had once mocked their commander. Their eyes were fixed on the reviewing platform, where high-ranking officers and guests had gathered. At the center of that platform, walking with her usual poise, though with a faint limp that no one dared to mention, was Commander Alexandra Hart. She wore her formal dress blues, her medals shining faintly under the morning sun. The recruits straightened instinctively when she appeared, the weight of her presence commanding silence. The Master of Ceremonies stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we honor the graduating members of Class 92 and the extraordinary commander whose leadership shaped them." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Hart's eyes swept across the line of soldiers before her. Each face held memories of storms, sweat, failure, and triumph. But more than that, she saw something she had worked her entire life to build: respect. She took a slow breath and stepped to the microphone. "When I first met Class 392, she began, her voice steady but rich with emotion, "I saw raw strength, but not discipline. I saw ambition, but not humility. I saw men eager to prove themselves, yet unaware of what true leadership means." She paused, glancing toward Rivers, Mills, and Tanner. "Over the weeks that followed, you were broken down, tested, and reshaped. You faced storms, pain, and your own fears. Some of you were forced to confront who you really are and who you could become." The courtyard was utterly still. Hart's voice softened. "I pushed you not because I wanted to see you fail, but because I wanted you to discover that you were capable of more than you believed." She glanced up at the flag, fluttering in the wind. "I once stood where you stand now, young, hungry, and uncertain. I was laughed at, doubted, told I didn't belong. But I stayed. Because courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to move forward despite it." Her gaze returned to them. "You've learned that strength isn't measured in muscle or medals. It's measured in how far you're willing to go for the man beside you." A single tear threatened at the corner of Tanner's eye, though he blinked it away quickly. Hart nodded once, firmly. "Today you are no longer recruits. You are soldiers. And more importantly, you are a team." She stepped back from the podium. The audience rose in applause, not polite but thunderous. Even the senior officers clapped with genuine admiration. As the ceremony neared its end, the Master of Ceremonies called her name again. Commander Alexandra Hart. Front and center, she hesitated, surprised. "Sir, this honor was authorized by Naval Command," the man said, smiling, "in recognition of your exemplary leadership, personal bravery, and the transformation you brought to this program. You are hereby awarded the Silver Star for distinguished service." A murmur spread through the crowd. Hart's breath caught. She had received commendations before, but never one like this. This one wasn't for a mission overseas or a battlefield victory. It was for something quieter, but perhaps even greater. The senior officer pinned the medal to her uniform. "For your courage under fire," he said solemnly, "and for redefining what it means to lead." Applause thundered again. Echoing off the cliffs, Rivers couldn't help it. He let out a proud, sharp whistle, and the rest of the recruits joined in, clapping and cheering for the woman who had changed their lives. Hart looked down, a faint, rare smile touching her lips. "At ease," she said, but her voice trembled ever so slightly. For the first time, the woman who had built her identity on strength allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. After the ceremony, the courtyard emptied slowly. Families reunited, officers congratulated, photographs were taken. Hart stood near the flagpole, the same one where she had once spoken to Rivers under the stars. The breeze carried the faint scent of salt and pine. Footsteps approached. "Permission to speak freely, Commander," Rivers said, stopping a few feet away. She turned. "Granted, Corporal," he smiled. "We wanted to say thank you. Not just for the training, for everything." Hart folded her arms lightly. "You earned every bit of it, Rivers. I just gave you the tools." Tanner limped up beside him, holding something in his hand, a small wooden plaque carved roughly but carefully. "We made this," he said, handing it to her. She looked down. It was simple but beautiful, a hand-carved Navy SEAL trident with words etched beneath it. "She taught us strength through sacrifice, respect through example, courage through compassion." Hart's throat tightened. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Finally, she looked up at them. "You men, you honor me more than any medal ever could," Mills grinned. "Guess we're not the same fools who laughed in the showers, huh?" Hart raised an eyebrow, half smiling. "No, Mills, you're not. You finally learned to see people, not stereotypes." He nodded, humbled. Rivers took a deep breath. "Where will you go now, Commander?" "Another unit?" She looked out toward the sea, the sunlight glinting off the waves. "Maybe. Or maybe it's time to teach somewhere new. There's always another group who needs to learn what you just did." Rivers extended his hand. "Whatever you do, ma'am, we won't forget you." She shook his hand firmly. "And I won't forget any of you, ever." Weeks later, long after Class 392 had departed, Camp Spartan felt almost empty. Hart remained in her quarters, packing the few things she owned. Her medals, her brother's dog tags, the wooden plaque the recruits had given her. She placed them carefully into her duffel bag. Before leaving, she walked once more to the training grounds. The morning fog was rising again, soft and pale. She closed her eyes, listening to the echoes of memory, the shouting, the laughter, the storms, the lessons. Then faintly, she heard voices, not real but remembered. "Ma'am, you're not like the others. You taught us how to be soldiers. You showed us what it means to be human." She smiled to herself. Her radio crackled softly. "Commander Hart, this is Command HQ. We have a request for an instructor at Fort Barrington. They specifically asked for you." Hart looked up at the sky, the wind tugging at her uniform. She pressed the radio. "Copy that. Tell them I'm on my way." As she walked toward the gate, the camera of the story would linger on her silhouette, strong, graceful, determined. Framed against the vast expanse of ocean and sky, a black SUV pulls up. A woman steps out in uniform. The chatter dies instantly. The new recruits stare, wide-eyed, as she removes her cap, revealing sharp blue eyes and a faint scar above her brow. Commander Alexandra Hart surveys the field and says with calm authority, "Let's begin." The whistle blows. The next chapter begins.